We may ask, one of the state report cards shows, this recent state report card shows 75% of our expenditures are through direct classroom instruction. So we're really proud of overwhelming majority of our dollars are spent in the classroom, with other dollars, so for example, transportation that is not instructional related, transportation maintenance, and other things like that. And so, we like to talk and say we have two issues here. We have a space and a growth issue, but we also have a revenue issue. And this graph really shows where that's coming from. And this is a graph that we've seen many, if you've ever paid attention to our board meetings and looked at the 5-year forecast that we do update in November and May of each fiscal year. You will see this is one of the first graphs that usually we bring up. And I would like to point out, I talked about the 7.9 mil operating levy in issue 12 generating 34.2 million, and always will essentially generate 34.2 million. You really can see that in this blue line and the revenue line, where our revenues remain relatively flat as we continue to go on. But as you can see through increasing enrollment, increasing staff needs, or whether maybe there's special student needs that we need as more staff labor intensive. And so and inflationary and cost of living adjustments as we keep going forward there continue as expenditures go up. And you can see this kind of leads to where kind of issue and where we're at. If you look at the bottom there in the ending balance, you have a little red circle there. That's when we hit the negative, in which is fiscal year 26. And so from a fiscal year perspective, we as a district run on a July 1 to June 30th. We're currently in fiscal year 24 right now. And so in fiscal year 26 is when, if we don't get additional revenue, we're going to have to cut expenses, and so we can allow us to operate one additional year. One last thing is we're not allowed to, unlike the federal government, operate in a negative. We have to have a positive cash balance. If we don't, I know we have to file every time we do a 5-year forecast update with the Ohio Department of Education, and they don't like it too well when we have negative cash balances. They could potentially come in, if that would continue, and do a takeover of the district for financial purposes.
So as Mr. Kern mentioned, we're in fiscal year 24. We run out of money in fiscal year 26. And so we have a revenue problem. We also have a growth challenge. The Dublin City Schools are expected to grow by 270 students a year through the early 2030s. 270 students a year is a new elementary school every 3 years. Abraham Depp Elementary was built to house about 750 students. We already redistricted 150 students out 2 years ago. This year, we brought 12 modular classrooms to Depp. We brought those modular classrooms thinking that we would use 6 classrooms this year and 6 classrooms next year. We are already in 11 of those 12 classrooms this year. If nothing is done by 2027, Abraham Depp would reach double the capacity. When you look at Eversole Run was built for about 1,000 students. Next school year, we get to 998. And in 26-27, we exceed the capacity of Eversole Run Middle School. Dublin Jerome just had a 60,000 square foot addition there. 60,000 square foot addition added 23 classrooms to Jerome High School. As you can see at this chart, with the addition of Jerome in 26-27, we begin to run out of space at Jerome High School. And contrary to popular opinion, there's not a lot of extra space over at Scioto. Scioto has over 1,450 students in it. We could fit another 100 kiddos or so over at Scioto, but Scioto is not empty and does not have a lot of space. So when we look at all of our grade levels, we start to reach or exceed capacity very quickly. The proposed residential developments that we're talking about as we plan for the future aren't limited to Jerome Village. The big red circle in the northwest part of our district map represents Jerome Village and the areas around Jerome Village. Jerome Village, which was originally zoned for 1,700 students, 1,700 homes, then went to 2,400 homes. Now they plan for over 5,000 homes in and around Jerome Village. So that growth up there is real and it is happening at an exponential pace. I drove by just this week the old athletic club at Sawmill. That's represented by the small dot with the letter D. The city of Columbus has zoned this as part of a CRA, a community reinvestment area. They're building 200 multi-bedroom units there. It's labeled affordable housing, and they granted a 15-year 100% tax abatement for that area. When you look at some of the other dots, these are all proposals that have been before planning and zoning in one of our areas, in some of our neighborhoods. And we think about Metro Place, we think about Dublin Village. And when people say, well, what could that really happen? For those folks who have been here for a while, if I had told you a decade ago that Anderson's would be multifamily housing, you wouldn't have believed that that would happen. So we continue to monitor the growth and the potential growth in all parts of the school district. So the two issues that we're facing, the $145 million bond issue allows us to build the 15th elementary school. 15th elementary school would solve some of our space issues. It would be built on the former Riviera Golf Course property located behind the visitor bleachers at Jerome High School. We've already begun the process of planning that site and working with Dublin Planning and Zoning to make sure if this is passed on November 7th, we will have bid packages ready to go at the first board meeting in the month of December. The plan, if passed, is for this building to open in August of 2025. With the addition of the 15th elementary school, we would also then need to do some targeted redistricting in the northwest portion of our district. That would mean students and families in neighborhoods that currently go to Glacier, Depp, some of Penny, and Deer Run would work with the attendance areas of the new elementary to readjust the enrollment patterns in that area. Passage of the levy would allow us to maintain current class offerings and current class sizes, and allows us to keep a positive cash balance into fiscal year 28. With passage of the levy, we also have to look for ways to be more efficient and effective in our scheduling. And our commitment to our community is that this is not an either or, this is a yes and. And we have to continue to work to find ways to be more efficient to stretch levy dollars. Our goal is to stretch this for 4 years. The bond also allows us to take care of some of our older buildings. When we look at what we did last year at Old Sawmill, being able to replace the roof in the HVAC system, when we look at Dublin Scioto High School, which turns 30 years old in a couple of years, it was built in 1995. It needs elevator work, roof work, HVAC work. We have plans to put a new roof on Davis Middle School, plans to make upgrades at Sells Middle School, and plans to redo the HVAC system at Riverside Elementary. We must take care of our older facilities, which allows us to continue to provide equity of experience in our classrooms for the students across the district. If the levy is rejected, in order to make that fund balance last one more fiscal year, allow that fund balance to go from 2026 to 2027, we have to make $40 million in reductions. This is approximately 200 positions. Along the same lines, we have to find space for 1,000 elementary students in the next several years. So the solution to both a cost problems and a space problem is to increase class sizes. Right now, our kindergarten and first graders have a cap of 24 students in their class. That would increase to 28. In grades 2 and 3, we operate with 26 as our cap. That would go to 30. And in grades 4 and 5, we work with a cap of 28. That would also go to 30. This increases the potential enrollment and capacity at every elementary, anywhere from 60 to 100 students. It also allows us to reduce the number of teachers. So by increasing class sizes and redistricting all of the elementaries and middle schools, it allows us to address both the revenue side of things, because we will cut expenses, and the space side of things, because we increase capacity in all of our existing buildings. At our secondary level, where our average class size target is 25, we shift that class size target to 30. We put a floor and say we will not offer any courses with less than 20 students. That puts at risk some of our IB classes, some of our AP courses, some of our fine arts courses. It puts at risk some of our elementary strings program. And it really will force us to make each class bigger and put a greater burden on our teachers to teach larger class sizes. We've recently been asked, where did these positions come from? And this presentation will be posted on the website so anybody can see what they can't see now or can't take a screenshot of quickly. But when we look at, by modifying class sizes, it's 60 elementary staff members, 62 middle, and 82 high school staff members. When you look at the cost savings and how we get to that 45 million, and I'll explain why it says 55 million here in a second, the school year doesn't match up with the fiscal year and doesn't match up with the tax year. So when we look at when taxes are collected, this is a stretch between the 24-25 school year and the 25-26 school year. The reason it shows 55 million as the maximum savings is we know we will not realize the maximum savings with class sizes. And let me just give you an example. If we say the maximum class size in 5th grade is 30, and we have a building that has 107 kids in it, it's not 4 full sections. That 107 students would equate to 2 classes of 26 and 2 classes of 27. So they're not getting to those maximum numbers at every building all the time. When we work with a firm to help us redistrict, we'll get as close to we can. But when you look at a cohort, there may be a cohort with less 3rd graders than 4th graders and more 5th graders than 3rd graders. So we have to over plan for the savings to hit a target of 45 million. We also look at secondary media specialists, EL coaches. We have a hiring freeze so we don't replace people who retire. Administratively, our deans of students and interns will be returned to the classroom. 3 other administrators will be reduced. We just reduced one of those positions on Monday when someone left our administrative team and we're not filling that position. Our instructional coaches go back to the classrooms. So all of these savings will be felt. And as I told a group recently, we can't ask our team to do more with less because we're working at capacity. If a levy is not successful, we're going to have to do less with less, because when these people are no longer in our ranks, that will be felt with how we provide services. When you look at the future and what does the future bring? If a levy's passed in November of 23, we will break ground in late winter, early spring on that new elementary and on an addition to our preschool. Our preschool, and some people think preschool is a luxury. By law, we must serve preschool students who are age 3 and 4 and identified with a disability. And as we look at serving those students, the new centralized preschool will run out of space in 2025. We will also do the request for proposals and request for qualifications for all of the other projects. They all can't be done in one summer, but over the next several years, we'll get those capital improvements done. In August of 25, we open elementary 15 in the preschool, and we're going to have a conversation as a community about how do we want to handle the impending high school growth. We're going to be able to keep the lid on, and things like Emerald Campus, where almost 1,600 kids come per day. Emerald Campus has bought us time. The addition on Jerome has bought us time. But as a community, we're going to have a tough conversation. We're going to have to try to build consensus. Do we want a 4th high school? Do we want to have 3 larger high schools? Do we build a freshman building on each campus? What's that going to look like? It's going to be up to us together as a community to engage in real difficult conversations and set a path forward for high school. Down the road, with the growth that we're anticipating, at some point we're going to have a conversation about elementary 16 and middle school 6. The growth's coming, and we have to be prepared. This Board of Education purchased 100 acres on the corner of Mitchell DeWitt and Industrial Parkway. Thanks to the Scott family, who was very generous in working with the district on that land acquisition. It could be a 4th high school. It could be middle school 6 and elementary 16, but Dublin has always planned ahead. We have the land for the 15th elementary behind Jerome. The land that Hopewell sits on, the district owned for 30 years, in preparation for the growth that's coming. It's what we do. We plan for growth, we plan ahead, and we always aim to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. So as we move on, if you have a question, you can use the link in the chat or email info@dublinschools.net. As we now move on to the question and answer portion of the presentation. And thanks to those of you who over the last several weeks has said that we've got questions for you already. So here we go. Mr. Kern, first question's for you. Dublin schools enroll students from 3 counties and many municipalities other than the city of Dublin. Is the tax burden only on city of Dublin residents? Who pays our school taxes? And then if your home's listed as a Plain City address, not Dublin, but you come to our schools, what taxes do you pay there?
So everybody within the Dublin City Schools boundary, and you saw that in one of the previous slides in the plan development, everybody there will pay the same tax rate or millage rate, as I talked about previously, as anyone else would throughout the district. So for example, someone in Columbus would pay the same tax rate or millage rate as someone would in Jerome Township. And even though they have a Plain City address, as long as they're in the Dublin City School District, they're going to pay the same school taxes as everyone else. I should be clear with that. It's the same millage rate and taxes for school districts. Now, you may have different things for depending on where you live for the local jurisdiction, whether it's the county or city or different thing, but the school tax rate, millage rate, is the same throughout the whole Dublin City Schools boundary.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Very helpful. Jen, next question's for you. Dr. Schwanke, I know we're going to end up with first names here at some point because we're just friends now. Emerald Campus seems to not be on the list that Dr. Marshausen talked about. It seems like some of the programs there would be easy places to make cuts. What's happening with Emerald, and will there be cuts at Emerald Campus?
Absolutely, there will be cuts. Many students come to Emerald Campus for our academies, IB classes, and AP classes. Those students currently enjoy low class sizes, as do students who are in those particular academy programs. So as Dr. Marshausen said earlier, we do not plan to run any classes if they don't have an enrollment of at least 20 students. So this will have a profound impact on Emerald Campus students. They won't be as readily able to build a schedule with the flexibility they currently are used to. Dublin has a long history of doing whatever it can do to make student schedules work, especially to utilize the Emerald Campus options. But if the levy is not approved, those options for courses will be diminished.
Yeah, and Jen, I also think some of the things like we talked about Monday night at our board meeting, when we look at the academies and having Peter Cortola and Ease, Emerald Campus is kind of the connector, but when our entire community can be a classroom, and we envision maybe up to 100 kids being in that Ease Logistics Academy, that helps with overcrowding. It also helps with costs. And Emerald Campus really is a cost saver for us because we can maximize programming.
Right.
Yeah, it's cool how And when we look at this building, which Mr. Kern, about 20 million all in for this building at 100,000 square feet or so. You know, if you look at building today, our estimates are $515 per square foot. This building's a heck of a bargain to be able to house the students that we have in it and be able to provide the services we do. So we're really proud of Emerald Campus.
We are, and I'm glad that you pointed out the academies again. I think it's would be a mistake for our community to think that Emerald Campus won't be affected, though. It's easy to see where the cuts will affect us at elementary, at the middle, and our high schools. But Emerald Campus really does have connections to all of the high schools, and those academies that we're so proud of do take staff to oversee and to make sure that the students have the experience promised to them. So the impact will be felt in terms of class availability, options, and access to those academies, IB and AP.
Yes, thank you. Do you have a plan to reduce discretionary spending that does not include eliminating classes or people, like utilities, grounds, maintenance, administrative costs, seminars, travel, consultants? If a levy is rejected, everything's on the table as we look at ways to reduce. As Mr. Kern shared earlier, the bulk of our expenditures, 85%, is people, but everything adds up. So I think as we look at, are there ways to be more efficient in how we take care of our grounds? One of the things that was on the slide that I didn't talk about is increasing rental fees, increasing fees to use our buildings. That would impact things like DYA and the Dublin Youth Football. As we look at to collect the true cost of opening up our buildings to the community. When we look at things like consultants, there are times that consultants save us a ton of money. When you look at a consultant helping us through a comprehensive staffing audit and analysis, the cost of that audit, which will be released in final form come the end of this month, that's going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars by helping us be more efficient. When we look at a consultant to help us do redistricting, that's not man hours that we're spending internally. That allows us to use someone who it's their area of expertise, and those consultants provide a great value for lesser costs than us trying to do that ourselves. And when we look at continuing education, some of the stuff's mandatory. As we talked about at the board meeting, and Lori Marple shared so eloquently, the mandatory dyslexia training that we are providing our teachers in the primary grades, we spent $13,000 in substitute costs in just one of the days of that training so that we could provide the training to our teachers, and that's mandated. As we look at keeping teachers up to date with what we need to be able to provide the education to our students in the classrooms, yeah, we'll be very mindful of where we send people and who we consult with and what we do, but we're always very mindful when we do that. In a levy, things get a little bit tighter. Mr. Kern, why isn't there new revenue on your graph for new homes? Why does that revenue seem flat? We've seen an awful lot of growth in development. Why is that not showing up in our financials?
You will see a little bit of an additional growth. And so when we get new construction in areas throughout the district there, we do get a one-time bump into our tax base from that standpoint. But for example, in calendar year 25, and taxes are collected, just to go back real quick, taxes are collected on a calendar year basis from that standpoint. And so we have estimated in calendar year 25, for example, 1.4 million in new construction growth in revenue, which is, if you're looking at our budget, we're approximately 270 million in our budget. So it's a very little small bump from that standpoint. But just for example, so 1.4 million in increased revenue, but if we gain 200 students. And if you're looking at the state report card, our equivalent per pupil was $12,494, I believe. And so if you take that times approximately 200 new students, that's 2.5 million. And so that expenditure just from additional enrollment, not counting inflationary increases and cost of living and so forth, doesn't keep up with that. New construction doesn't keep up with that enrollment growth even.
Thank you. And as you mentioned before, House Bill 920, we're going to get $34.2 million. Just how it works, huh? Dr. Schwanke, who does our enrollment projections and how do the enrollment projections today compare to what we were looking at in 2018? And how confident are we as we look going forward at the accountability and the accuracy of these projections?
This is an excellent question with several parts to it. So I'm going to do my best to answer all parts. The reference to the enrollment projections in 2018 was actually from a report from a company named Future Think, who the district hired in 2017 to do enrollment projections. We used those projections in 2018 up until 2020, at which point the district shifted over to a different consulting company that at the time was called Cooperative Strategies. And if you've been listening to our presentations, you've probably heard us say Cooperative Strategies. They were recently sold and is now called Woolpert. These companies, specifically Woolpert, is a national firm that does redistricting and projections for districts all over Baltimore, New Orleans, Philadelphia, and so on. So they really know what they're doing. Now, how do they project growth? When they come in, they look at a selected average or weighted average using a statistical distributional theory method. What that does is it provides the district with low, medium, and high enrollment projections. We tend to use the moderate projections because we have found over time that those are the most accurate. Now, there's a caveat there because the high enrollment projections with our most recent report could come to fruition just depending on the development in certain parts of our district. But right now, we're looking at moderate. The question was, how do they compare those 2017, 2018 numbers with now? The numbers in 2017-18 were actually slightly higher, the projections were, than what we have enrolled right now. But what's interesting is there were some grade levels that were almost spot on, just 2 or 3 students off. But there were some other grade levels that were off in a more substantial way. When these companies come in and do projections, I think it's important for people to know it's not just a guess, right? It's not just throwing something against a dartboard and putting it on a spreadsheet. These companies look at census data. They look at housing patterns and interest rates, new building permits. They look at active and planned residential development. They study units that are constructed and units that are occupied. They look at whether units are single family or multifamily, and if they're multifamily, what that actually means. We have some multifamily apartments in our community where there's maybe 1 or 2 students that come out of them. We have multifamily apartments, though, where there's 3 or 4 students that might come out of one family living there. Companies also look at live birth count, which, by the way, is based on the residence of the mother. They look at something we call transiency, which is the 10-year changes as students move through our system. And really what that looks like is the likelihood that a student starts in kindergarten and is still here in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. They look at birth to kindergarten and birth to first grade data that tells us when a student is born in the Dublin City Schools, do they attend kindergarten and first grade here? So that's just a look at some of the things that they study. All of this is done with all of the different areas that are captured with Dublin City Schools. So you've got Delaware County, Union County, Franklin County, right? Then you have all the townships: Concord, Jerome, Washington, Norwich, and Perry. You have Shawnee Hills, City of Columbus, City of Dublin, and a tiny little piece of Upper Arlington. So it's a massive job to get these projections put down on paper for us. And to have accurate numbers, a projection must be done frequently. Now, historically, Dublin only did a projection study when they were coming up on a levy, maybe, or when they saw unprecedented growth. We committed, thanks to Mr. Kern's help, to have Woolpert do a study for us every year for the next 3 years, just to keep track of how quickly enrollment is rising. And so that's where we were able to get it so specific to about 270 students joining us every year. It's important to know, though, the projections are just that. It's not an exact science. It's taking the best information that we have and just projecting growth. Many, many, many things can change over the course of a projection report. What they did not know, FutureThink did not know in 2018, was that Intel was coming, that Amazon was going to really develop a presence here. We didn't know about some more hospitals being built, right? So whenever jobs come, here comes families and here comes students. We're really happy when we have new students join us. We're proud of our district. And so the growth is not a bad thing. We just have to really prepare ourselves for it and look far ahead. So long answer, but thank you for a complicated and often misunderstood question. I appreciate the opportunity to clear it up.
Yeah, and we get asked a lot, where is this going? And, you know, I think when we look at the most recent projections, we max out in about 2035. So we've got another decade plus of space as we move forward. Question that since the home and apartment developers are profiting greatly off this new construction, are they contributing financially? And if not, why aren't they forced to contribute to new schools? Ohio is a very business and developer friendly state. When we look at the economic development tools that these municipalities have, they have tools to entice and help developers get development starting, to put utilities and infrastructure in. So the way things are just set up in Ohio, there's no mechanism for the school district to collect impact fees. There's no impact for us to say we want more land. Sometimes developers do work with the school district if they think it'll benefit them. And Brian, can you just touch base on how we got that land from DEP and Eversole and how that process took place?
Yeah, so Nationwide Realty sold that land to the Jerome Village Community Authority, and the Jerome Village Community Authority sold it to us for $1. So we were able to do that. Now, I believe Nationwide sold that at market rate to the community authority, but they did give us that land, about almost 40 acres for $1 purchase.
So there are times that a developer may help out because, in all honesty, it benefits a large development to have a neighborhood elementary school. But we can't force them, and we got no mechanism to do that. Along the same line, someone asks, who do we vote out or challenge so Jerome Township doesn't keep growing this way? And can we ask our legislators that would encourage changes in future to Dublin City Schools and all Ohio schools? First of all, the decisions made in Jerome Township are made by 3 trustees. The Jerome Township trustees are solely responsible for permitting the number of homes, the density of homes, and the deals with developers. The Jerome Township trustees put a 10-year, 75% tax abatement in the form of a TIF on Jerome Grand. So Jerome Grand, 302 units, we get 120 students. It was the trustees in Jerome Township who chose, under the law, they're allowed to do this, to divert 75% of the tax dollars from the school district to put in the roads, the infrastructure, and the utilities for Jerome Grand. So if you have concerns in Jerome Township and Concord Township, we just received notice yesterday that they're going to do a 10-year 75% abatement or tax incremental financing in Concord Township on a parcel up there. So if you live in Concord Township, check with your trustees. For our friends who live in the city of Columbus but are Dublin City Schools, Mr. Kern and I met at length with Mayor Ginther's staff about the abatement that was put on the old athletic club. We were told basically that they don't care, that we just need to pay for it. So all of us where you live has the ability through your elected officials to influence growth patterns. We are very fortunate that the largest portion of our district is in the city of Dublin. And by and large, the city of Dublin has always been mindful of density, of the type of housing that gets put in, and the impact that growth has on schools because they know it impacts you as taxpayers. And as taxpayers, when we get more kids but not additional revenue, this Dublin City Council has always had the savvy to understand what that means for all of your taxes. So we're grateful for that partnership. We only wish the other municipalities we worked with would be as mindful of the impact that you all face as taxpayers when we get uncontrolled, unregulated growth. Mr. Kern, how many years does the levy last? And how many years will we see this increase in our property taxes?
Dr. Marshausen last talked about how it would allow us to operate through FY28 from that standpoint. But as far as the taxes and all our voted levies are what's called continuous levies, so they go on in perpetuity. And so I mentioned, for example, the additional tax dollars, for someone with a $500,000 home, it'll be approximately $1,100 forever, pretty much.
And as we said, our goal is to stretch it as long as we can. We've also shared we're going to keep growing. So we can't say these are our last schools. It's something that we get to plan for. Along the same lines as the earlier question, what is Dublin City Schools doing to ensure the developers of new homes are significantly contributing to the district's financial needs? We ask, we talk to officials. Mr. Kern and I are in a lot of meetings. The earlier question talked about the Ohio General Assembly. They just passed a new biennial budget with the fair school funding formula. That was fair for everybody but the wealthy districts in the state. It was not fair for us as we continue to grow, and our only option when we're only getting 13 cents back on every dollar that we as citizens send to the state, our only option is to come back to you. So some call it fair school funding. For Dublin, it was the unfair school funding formula. And we just don't, suburban districts that are deemed property wealthy don't have a lot of sway with the General Assembly in Columbus right now. I wish I could tell you something different. Mr. Kern, it was mentioned, I talked a little bit about 1075 TIF on land in Jerome. You want to do a better job than I did at explaining what a TIF is, why they would do it, and how long it lasts?
Yeah, actually, you did it. You did it really well from that standpoint. But typically, what you're looking in is doing is the tax increment financing is to encourage commercial development. And you know, for example, Jerome Grand is considered commercial. But when I say commercial, it's businesses, whether it's warehousing, whether it's office buildings or whatever mixed use it needs to be, is to encourage something that generates jobs. And so Dr. Marshausen mentioned the city of Dublin. The city of Dublin has done that well. Most of our, except for one, is what's called a non-school TIF. And so we get all the additional revenue that are additional, the revenue that we're supposed to on for those parcels that fall within that TIF. The one exception in the city of Dublin would be the Bridge Park area in the agreement. And that's an area where we're receiving property taxes of about 100,000 only. And now, as part of that development, and I don't think that development gets done unless there is the TIF on there, and we receive a compensation agreement, approximately exactly 1.5 million for the next 30 years, or for a 30-year period. So that explains kind of the city of Dublin. But when we talked about TIF, the 1075 TIFs, it's a tool to incentivize commercial development typically, but it can be for residential, unfortunately. But a 1075 TIF is a 10-year and 75%, where 75% gets diverted into, like Dr. Marshausen said, to pay for roads, water, sewer, and for example, and that. So into a TIF fund. So Jerome Grand, for example, that property is a 1075, and there's no approval on their school boards for that. The Bridge Street Agreement, yes, required board approval, but for 1075, it's in state law, and the township is allowed to do that without our approval, just to notify us is their only requirement. And so for that particular parcel of property, it generates for school taxes approximately 1.4 million annually. And so we get 25% of that, which is around 350,000, but the other 75% goes into the TIF fund, which is approximately $1 million, a little over. Then to reimburse, either in some instances, in this case, it would be Schottenstein Realty Group who developed that area, or it's the local jurisdiction, if it's a township or city or whatever, if you're looking at different areas of the state or within our boundaries.
Thank you. So when I say sometimes that they're diverting money from classrooms to build roads, that's pretty accurate. They're taking money that we could have used in the classroom and we're building a road with it, or putting in infrastructure.
Yep. And it's good if you're creating new jobs, right? It's better for the area and it's good for the local economy. And it's good for everyone when you're creating jobs, but not when it's necessarily a residential type of place.
Thanks, Brian. Jen, why are extracurricular improvements included as part of these capital improvement projects? And what is a multi-use facility and what's that going to be used for?
Excellent question. Two parts to it, and I will answer them separately. First of all, extracurriculars are a large part of what we do here in Dublin. We believe in them because we know how important it is for our students to have a sense of belonging, to be connected to their schools, to develop their social skills outside of the classroom. We believe that creating situations for students to become well-rounded will really help them in the future. Not only just the connections they make, but also developing those skills that can get them into college or get them their first job or help them with whatever step is there for them after high school. The state of Ohio also believes in this very much, and so they have added an engagement seal to the high school diploma. So even Ohio Department of Education says, hey, get kids involved. So extracurriculars are, we like to say there's something for everyone, and all of our high schools have committed to having their students at least be in a club or be part of a team, be in a play, be in choir, be in orchestra, something that keeps them involved in their schools. So facilities matter, right? You have to have a place for all of this to happen. You also have to have club advisors or coaches or supervisors to help make all these things happen. All of that does take financial commitment. So in terms of the facilities, the specific question here was about the multi-use hitting facility. So I will address what that actually is. I know that can be confusing. Jerome High School has had a multi-use hitting facility for about 21 years, I believe. Kaufman and Scioto did not have one, which created a significant inequity for the extracurriculars that did use it. Specifically, that's baseball and softball. However, when there is space allowed, the athletic directors do work with other coaches, other teams that might use those facilities. So it could potentially be used by 4 or 5 other teams. What has happened with athletics is many times these sports are year round. And so it's important that baseball players, softball players, golfers, some other sports can get into indoors to practice their sport throughout the year. So we don't have enough indoor space for those teams. Again, Jerome has had a multi-use hitting facility for many years. And so the district has committed to eliminating that inequity by building multi-use hitting facilities at Scioto and Kaufman. That will provide a similar access experience for our students. So I hope I answered that. Again, 2 different questions, extracurriculars and the multi-use hitting facility. Thank you for a great question.
Next question is something we get asked from time to time, and it's, can we just draw a line so that not a single new home can be built moving forward in the school district? No. Again, that's the trustees and city council officials who have that. And then the same question asks, when will the district geographically stop growing and who decides our boundaries? Geographically, we're set. I showed that map earlier with the kind of hot zones where growth was. Our boundaries are fixed in school districts in Ohio. I could talk for hours and I love the conversation, but I won't bore you all with how school districts came about. Suffice it to say, at one point we had all little one-room schoolhouses in every township, burg, or village. And as we industrialized, we saw the need for bigger high schools, and they all started to combine. So the school districts, the way they've been formed, have been who aligned with whom. And as you look at those districts, those are the lines we see today. So the process to start a new district or do property transfers is governed by the State Board of Education. It is a multi-year process. And at either point, either district can reject the transfer. So if we were to say, hey, they're building a whole bunch of homes up there with Plain City addresses, we think they should go to JA. JA is going to say, no, we got enough of our own growth, so we don't want them, and it's done. So property transfers are very difficult, nearly impossible in today's political environment. And our boundaries are our boundaries. And when we talk about the growth in Dublin, I'm sure there was a time when Tartan was built or Riviera was built, or Wedgwood was built, and people said, why do we keep having these new houses and this new growth? Look at all they're building there. Yeah, we've always accepted the people as part of our Dublin community. And as a school district, we have an obligation. A home's built in our community, kids come to our door, we educate the kids, and we give them an amazing education. And that's why everybody's building homes in Dublin. We're one of the 2 fastest growing districts in Ohio. The other one's Olentangy. And when you look, we're 2 of the highest performing districts that prepare students for success after graduation. Another question, why should residents in older school areas have to pay taxes when the benefits only seem to be in the new schools? The equity is not the same. Walk into Carr, walk into Eversole, it's not the same. As we've talked about a little bit tonight, we're doing an awful lot of improvements. Of the 145 million, about 45 million is for a new building that will go in the northwest quadrant. There's 100 million or so that'll be spent around the district. And when we look at our last couple of years of even PI, I think we spent like $5.3 million in Scioto feeder pattern schools and 1.3 million in all of the other feeder pattern schools. So we really prioritize creating learning environments that are similar for all students. And I know, Jen, you were the principal at Indian Run when you went through a home makeover there. So you want to talk a little bit about what that means and how that impacts what we do?
Exactly. Dr. Marshausen is right. We do have buildings that are quite old. I was, not to make this about Jen's journey, but I was at Sells Middle School when the 1919 building was completely renovated, and we built a connector that attached the previous cells with the 1990 building. And that's a building that's 104 years old now and is being actively used every day by 8th graders. So that's a 100-plus-year-old building. And then we have a building that's 2 years old. So that's what you get with a growing district. I was I came into Indian Run at the tail end of it was our oldest elementary, and it went through an entire renovation, gutted. New drywall, new cubbies, new doors, everything new except really the cinder blocks. And this is a building that way back in the day held our central office. So what I think the community needs to understand is our buildings look different, but they're all very well cared for. They go through significant audits by firms that come in and say, okay, this is something that's going to need replaced. It's coming up near end of life. And so we prioritize our facilities, but we also are adamant that we have all students, no matter whether they walk into a 100-year-old building or a 2-year-old building, have excellent teachers, excellent resources, and access to equitable opportunities. As I was just saying earlier, we're adding a multi-use hitting facility so that students who go to those high schools have the same experience as a school that had one. So I also, in 1998, I was here when Carr opened. I opened Carr along with about 100 other people, but that building is now older, right? It's 24 years old and it's starting to need updates. The roof has some leaks. There's some problems with HVAC. And so we fix as much as we can, and then we replace when we have to, just like we all would with our own homes.
Thanks, Jen. The experience matters.
Yep.
Timing of the levy overlapping with high inflation, financial struggles, reappraisals. Brian, can you highlight again that what a 35% increase means in Dublin on 7.9 mils and how that will be calculated moving forward?
Yeah, so there again, just I mentioned, for example, the 35% hits right on to I mentioned Auditor Kite set up in the Delaware County area of the district. Said a 35% increase in value and due to reappraisal is only results in a 4% increase in taxes, not counting the levy. And so this all leads to, as you're talking about voted mills over time, we've talked about, I think I mentioned, we have about approximately 90 mills of voted mills, and House Bill 920 then reduces as values rise, reduce those millages down to approximately 43 mills today. So as you continue to look, this new levy, 7.9 mils, is estimated to only be collected at 6.27 mils per $100,000 of, or yeah, 6.27 mils, which is $219 per $100,000 of value. And it'll essentially generate $34.2 million forever. And so as we add to the pie per se, that could potentially lower some people's, as they go through taxes on the existing stuff we had, depending on if they fall at the average, above the average, or below the average.
Thanks, Brian. Jen, we have 133 Dublin students enrolled in a 2-year IB course program. If we discontinue IB, what does this look like for the juniors who are in the classes? And how are we going to help these kiddos move forward?
That's a great question. I know that those 133 Dublin students are anxiously worried about their next year. As we explained earlier, we can't when we try to save money, we have to do it through reduction in staff. That means, again, that we're not going to run classes that are too small. We won't be able to staff them. So depending on the outcome of the levy, our school counselors will need to work with these students to pursue changes to their course pathways. Again, I said earlier that classes that have 20 or higher we can run, but those small classes typical for IB will not be able to run. So following the levy, the district will really need to examine the feasibility of all courses, not just IB, and help our students find a path forward.
Question comes in from one of our residents. Can you or the board find a more equitable system where a household with 4 children pays more than a household with 1 child? Since the household with 4 is receiving 4 times the services, that would seem more equitable, charging each household the same. The Ohio Constitution requires that we provide a thorough and efficient education to all students. And because it's constitutionally mandated, I like to think of education like a service. We're in the service industry. We provide a service to the community, very similar to that. If you live in Washington Township, the fire department provides a service to the community. We don't charge people by how many times the fire department comes to your home. In fact, we pay a lot of property taxes to have an elite fire department with the hope that we never need them. From a school perspective, the service provided to the school district is to the home. And it's one of the reasons that property values are so high in Dublin. It's one of the reasons that Dublin is a destination district for families. So it's not so much a tax levied against the residents of the home. It's a tax levied against the value of the property. And the value of the property is where it is in large part because of the services that are provided by the school district, by the fire department, by the police department. So while you may not use it all the time, just like you might not call the Dublin police all the time, it's a service that's provided and available to each household. The pay to play portion of public education isn't something that is done. Could you address the per pupil spending as compared to some of the more highly rated Central Ohio school districts? And this resident looks at Olentangy, Upper Arlington, New Albany, and Bexley. What's being done to increase our ratings, and how will the levy help fund that? The school districts that were mentioned are nowhere near as diverse as we are. When you look at the diversity in the Dublin City School District, sixth most EL students, 1,300 students with special needs, over 13% students who are economically disadvantaged. When you look at who we serve, it requires more resources, and we put those resources where they're needed. When you look at the services in our title buildings, in our buildings that have the highest needs, they get more services to meet the needs of the kiddos. When you look at growth of our students grow incredibly well, and our teachers do an amazing job. And for us, the finish line isn't third grade. The finish line and prepared for success, our mission, is when they walk across the stage at the Schottenstein Center and I get to give them a diploma. So it's a journey for some of our kids. And when you're comparing districts, you have to keep all of this and take all of this into account. We have families who leave some of the districts that you mentioned to come here for our special ed services because we do it better and we do it differently. We believe that elementary students with special needs should go to the elementary in their neighborhood. We don't cohort them and send them to other neighborhoods. We want them in the neighborhood with their siblings and their friends and their neighbors. So yeah, the way we do things gives us an opportunity to change the lives of the kids who come in, but it also allows us to create that sense of family. That's amazing. And Jen, we talked recently at a board meeting about there's a difference between looking good and being good. And we try to be good, and sometimes it may not show on the state report card, but it's better. Can you touch base on that?
Absolutely. The state report card itself is pretty complicated because there are ways that districts can get around some of the measures. So, for example, Dublin City Schools uses one assessment called the KRA, which gives our teachers a lot of really good information day one for how to approach instruction for their 5-year-olds. Some districts chose not to give the KRA. They gave an assessment that was more basic and gave them information about kindergarten readiness in the sense of, do they know those basic skills? But it didn't give instructional information for our teachers. We elected to utilize that more rigorous assessment because it would help us teach. Now, you could argue that got us a little bit of a ding for the state report card because we started with information that showed some of our students struggling as readers as kindergartners. So again, depending on the selection criteria that the state uses for that report card, it skews the results somewhat. So that's why we're very careful to explain to people what the state report card says, what it means, and really encourage people to keep an eye on their own child's growth and development through time because we are so diverse. We have students coming into our schools that are reading, chapter books in third grade. We have students that are still struggling in third grade to master the English language. So it really depends on the individual student, and that's part of why we personalize so much for our student experience.
Jen, I'm gonna keep you going. You've done a lot of the work with Cropper and Associates, and maybe you can talk a little bit about them. Will all grades be redistricted if the levy passes or fails? And then how will we go about that redistricting, and what happens to individual schools if people have questions now?
Okay, this is a great question. I know this is on everyone's mind. Redistrict, I'm going to be very, very clear that we do not know the answers right now about where students will be redistricted. We don't know. We have not begun that work yet. Because if we had, we would have to have basically redistricting plan A and B, which would, quite frankly, waste taxpayer dollars. So we paused. We have not redistricted yet. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, we heard you already know. No, we don't know. What we have done is contract with a company called Cropper GIS. And again, Cropper does redistricting all across the country in many fast growing areas. What will happen is, depending on the outcome of the levy, if it is approved, we will need to do redistricting for the upcoming school year, the 24-25 school year. Why so fast? Because we simply don't have enough seats for some students in some of our schools. And then we do have schools where there are openings. So that will happen kindergarten through 8th grade in the 24-25 school year if the levy is not approved. If the levy is approved, as Dr. Marshausen said earlier, we have plans that are ready to go to build that 15th elementary school. So redistricting will be paused for 1 year. We have the modulars at DEP that will buy us a little bit of time. We also have Principal Ursham at DEP and Principal Gibson at Eversole, who are able to work out some shared spaces to buy us enough time to get that elementary opened. So I'm going to say that again in more simple terms. If the levy is not approved, redistricting K-8 will happen in the 24-25 school year. If the levy is approved, elementary 15 will be built and redistricting K-8 will happen in the 25-26 school year. Did I get that right, John?
You did. And if it's approved, the redistricting will really be limited to the northwest
Thank you.
portion of the district.
Yes. So that's the other component. If the levy is approved, we need to alleviate the overcrowding at DEP, which will mean schools in that northwest quadrant will experience redistricting next year. But people ask me, well, what about Penny? What about Deer Run? Well, what about Glacier Ridge? How will that affect? I don't know. I don't have numbers. I don't have attendance lines. We simply don't have them yet because we, again, wanted to honor our the financial fidelity of only hiring contracted services when we really need them. So we don't know who will be affected and how many students, and it would be irresponsible for me to even guess at this point.
All right. There's a question: with commercial real estate at an all-time low, have we considered to purchase other commercial properties and do similar work to Emerald Campus? Yes, yes, yes. We have actually toured some large commercial office spaces that would provide great opportunities. We run into some of the challenges that we ran into here at Emerald. The building codes for commercial buildings are very different than the building codes for school buildings. And here at Emerald, we have students on the first 3 floors. The 4th floor is our central office, and that's because the 4th floor isn't zoned as an educational space. The code doesn't allow us to go up beyond 3 floors. So as we look at spaces, Jeff Stark, who's our Chief Operations Officer, who is absolutely amazing, knows all the zoning and building guys that you'd ever need to know in Central Ohio. He made all those relationships when he got this place done. So we have to be mindful. Yes, it would be a lot cheaper to buy commercial space. We have to have the right programs to put into that commercial space that meet the learning needs of our students. And the code, how that building was built, has to allow us to fully utilize all the space. Mr. Kern, Dr. Schwanke, and I toured a 7-story office building that is actually 100,000 square feet bigger than Jerome High School. We couldn't use the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors. So that kind of took that off the table. So yes, this is a creative leadership team with the support of an amazing Board of Education who continues to push us to be innovative and build the academies and build the programs that we need as we provide a great basic education to those kids, but we also provide all the new opportunities that we need in the 21st century. So we're ready to go. And if the right thing opens, we'll jump on it. Jen, we've talked a little bit about the elementary courses and IB. How's middle school going to be affected by the levy?
Great question. Again, it's important to understand that all students pre-K to 12 will experience a reduction in staff if the levy is not approved. That will absolutely be felt at the middle school. So class sizes will go up. Some of our middle schools right now are fortunate enough to have lower class sizes. Programming and the ability to maintain learning will be impacted should the voters reject the levy. The middle school principals are currently working with Mrs. Marple and Mr. Ulring to redesign the middle level experience. But we'll have to pause on that if the levy is rejected, because changes will need to be made on an accelerated timeline, obviously. And we will need to adjust student options, to ensure maximum flexibility in scheduling. Our principals are passionate about wanting options for our middle school learners, which I love about them, but options do require staff. And so unfortunately, if we're riffing, we won't, reduction in force, sorry, we won't be able to explore more options. We also may need to unblock ELA at grades 6 and 7 to assist in reducing staff. Reducing programming would look like a reduction in world language. Currently, Spanish is the only language that we are able to actually staff at all middle schools. But we do have some 8th graders who travel to the high school for an 8th grade world language experience, and we won't be able to accommodate that at our high schools for our middle level learners. And then there will be other pieces too that our middle schoolers will experience. The reduction in field trips will mean no trip to DC for our 8th graders. Other cuts that Dr. Marshausen referred to, raising the pay to participate fee, will all be felt at middle school. So again, it's everyone. Everyone will have to adjust if the levy is rejected.
A question came in: why does each high school have its own football stadium with artificial turf and concession stands? Wouldn't it be better to have a shared single game stadium? It lays out when those games could be played. Our stadiums and our fields at all 3 high schools are used probably 6 days a week. If I look out of my window right now, there's field hockey going on over at Kaufman High School. And we have field hockey teams, soccer teams every Tuesday and Thursday night. Either the boys or girls are playing soccer at home. The marching bands use our fields. The youth programs use our fields. We rent the fields out on the weekend to the travel teams that also use our fields. So the overall use of our fields is significantly more than just football. In the spring, we have tracks, lacrosse, and again, as Dr. Schwanke mentioned, a lot of our sports are now year-round. What's not unusual to see lights on and soccer teams on a turf field in the spring as well. So we actually need more field space, not less. I know the city of Dublin just approved the plan to turf all of Avery Field. So we are part of a larger community that we're proud to be part of, and it is a very active, youth sports driven in some cases, community. Jen, you look like you wanted to say something.
We've worked together too long, John. Make my facial expressions, and I want to jump in. I was here when we first added turf to our football fields, and I think it's important that our community knows it's significant cost savings over time, because they don't require the maintenance, the irrigation, et cetera, to maintain them. They're also safer too, because if you've ever tried to play football on a grass field in July in Ohio, it's not very forgiving. So that's important to know as well. The other thing that the question involved some suggestions about when we could play other games. So example, could we play a football game on a Saturday afternoon? The problem is you need your opponent, right? And so our OCC, the conference that Dublin is part of, they have over time really settled into time slots that sports play. So football is always on Friday nights, right? JV football and freshman football is always on Saturday mornings. Soccer is always Tuesdays and Thursdays, right, John? Field hockey is always Mondays. Wednesday is also field hockey. Anyway, the point is they're used every night, and that's when the opponents that we play are also available. Our fields, though, are used throughout the weekend, Saturday afternoons, Sunday afternoons, by community organizations that rent the field and bring in additional revenue for the district. So again, without having to maintain those, having them ready at all times is an important part of our community, and also cost savings for the district.
And we've become very close friends with Scott Gilgren and our friends at the DYA, as those youth programs. We've got almost every gym in our buildings booked from as soon as they can get in. And we're talking 7 days a week and Sundays from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. to get those people, to get our little ones into the gyms and active. So Uh, yeah, it's important to the community and it's part of who we are. Mr. Kern, there's a question. Somebody just wants to double check your numbers here. Is it true we're only collecting $1.4 million in calendar year 25 for all that new construction? Because it seems to this person that $1.4 million is like 1 to 2 homes in Jerome Village. So is your forecast accurate?
That is an estimate of 1.4 million in revenue growth due to new construction, and that may be the value of the houses, and for example, for the sale prices, but that wouldn't necessarily generate that much in taxes. For example, our forecast is if you look back over time, we feel like we're pretty accurate in what we do. We typically come within 1%, maybe as high as 2% within our estimates when it comes to revenue and expenses. And we feel really good at where we're at to be able to make the decisions. And also, from an accountability standpoint in our transactions, we are audited every year by either the auditor state, or if they don't have enough time and availability to it, as an outside independent auditor. Plattenberg's been our recent auditor, who has offices in Cincinnati, and they used to have one in Dublin as well. But from that standpoint, that audit us every year. And so one of the things they do look at the 5-year forecast, but they look at our transactions, our financial statements, whether we do operate essentially, unlike maybe some businesses. Now I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here from an accounting standpoint. But we essentially operate 365 days a year on a cash basis, which means essentially cash in, cash out. That's our 5-year forecast really when it comes. And they look at those transactions to make sure that we're reporting correctly on those as well. But we also do GAAP financial statements. If you ever seen our ACFR, our annual comprehensive financial report, there's a very detailed information in the back and or throughout, I should say, throughout the document when it comes from a GAAP basis, which is something we do for many reasons. There's a lot of data in there that is very useful, but it's very useful when we talk about issuing debt in our bond issues that we have, and $145 million, no new millages on this issue 12. We go to rating agencies when we do go to issue debt, and they rate our debt as our debt is typically tax exempt, which means people who buy it do not have to pay federal or state income taxes on it. But anyways, as we go through a process, and Dr. Marshausen knows that, as when we did the last issuance, he was here for Jerome addition and the Kaufman Skin Project for those debt issuance. It's a very thorough process where they're looking at our 5-year forecast, they're looking at our enrollment projections, they're looking at our GAAP financial statements, they're looking at a lot of stuff. And I know I've said a lot. So really, what I want to get to is, and we're proud of, is through S&P. Which used to be called Standard & Poor's, we have the highest credit rating of AAA, which allows us to borrow money at the lowest borrowing cost.
Thanks, Brian. And those rating calls are like an audit on steroids. When you go through that rating process and you've got those rating agents grilling you in questions, it gets pretty intense.
Yep.
Jen, as we look at the capacity of our schools, is there any place people can go see the enrollment projections over the next 5-year by schools? And is this a capacity issue across the district, or is it just a Northwest quadrant issue?
Short answer, yes. The entire projection enrollment report is available on the levy information page. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is about capacity. I get a lot of questions about the capacity of each of our schools and the current enrollment. What is really important that people understand is, depending on the services needed for a school, the square footage does not necessarily divide easily into a capacity number. So I'm going to give you an example. If there is a lot of EL services, special education services, reading services needed in a school, you have to have more office space, right? For your reading teachers, for your EL teachers, for your speech language pathologists, for your occupational therapist, your physical therapist, all of that, right? So a school might have more higher needs, and Dr. Marshausen spoke of that earlier. that if there's a school with high needs, some of our title buildings, the student or the school may be overcrowded, even though the square footage matches a school that perhaps doesn't need as many services for their students. So when people ask for capacity numbers, again, a school like Wright and a school like Scottish Corners, who are what we call cookie cutter schools, there's 6 of them across the district that have similar square footage. The way the building is used makes it hard to have a clear capacity number for you. So again, what we do to determine capacity is we look at square footage, we look at services, and then we decide how what number is reflects the capacity of that building. So that's a long answer about capacity. In terms of projections, look on the website for on the levy information page, and you'll find the entire report.
Question: if the levy fails, could fourth graders finish their elementary experience at their current school? Mental health is such an important thing. If it fails, it's going to be hard on children. If you let students stay at their own school, now you've got a whole nother cost. The other problem is you can't project. So no, we're not looking at allowing fourth graders to stay where they are. When we get with Cropper GIS, per board direction, we will be meeting with them after the levy, and in December, we will announce redistricting in January. And then from that redistricting in January, we have to do staffing in February, because the way that the state law goes with RIF lists for the teachers that we would have to let go as part of a reduction in force, that would be done in March. So in order to plan efficiently and not create additional busing costs, no, we are going to redistrict the entire elementary zone, knowing that children are resilient, that our teachers are amazing, and that one of our components will be keeping neighborhoods together. So that will be the focus there. Another question is, will there be a fourth high school conversation, and how does this levy impact the possible next levy in 3 to 4 years? Fourth high school, larger high schools, we're going to have to pass this first before we can get into that. So if this is passed on November 7th, then in 2025, 2026, we'll be having that fourth high school conversation. The Board of Education has already said if this doesn't pass this November, we'll be back on next November. Well, if we don't pass until November of 24, the earliest this could open would be August of 26, or potentially later, with the way construction crews and the way getting those resources are going to come to get even more crunched in Central Ohio. Right now, this is the push. Once we get through this and we get that school coming out of the ground, then we're going to have that fourth high school conversation. We're going to have revenue and enrollment issues every 3, 4, 5 years. And if you look at the history of levies in the Dublin City Schools since the mid-'80s, it's every 3, 4, 5 years. We're building schools and we're coming back for additional revenue. That's our cycle. And we'll have to have that conversation, but we got to get through this levy first. This levy doesn't dictate what that will look like, though. That'll be a whole separate conversation. Brian, are there any efforts not to increase taxes on every individuals every 3 or 4 years, and just budget to use the increases in property tax value?
So I guess I can hit this in several different ways there, and try to hit it with that, for example. But yes, we are doing stuff. When Dr. Marshausen, we just kind of talked about, we kind of have to do this every 3 to 5 years, whether it's revenue, space issues. But he talked about earlier, talking about a staffing report and audit, and to be more efficient in what we can be doing. From a standpoint, so we can always try to stretch these levies even farther, and then we can as we continue to. But we'll try to do what we can to cut from 3 to 5 years. But we talked about new construction, where it estimates only $1.4 million increase. For example, I did talk about a small increase from inside millage. We do get a little bit, but that estimate right now is approximately 2.8 million only from reappraisal. And reappraisal only happens every you have what's called I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind here, but essentially every 3 years, full reappraisal every 6 years. You have triennial update in between there. That was I was trying to think of from that in between, which is a little different than a full reappraisal. But also too, that 2.8 million, that is based off of larger increases in value just on inside millage. And so if we don't have as large reappraisal increases, that additional revenue every 3 years is not going to be there as much. So, and then you're not only enrollment growth, you're talking about inflationary and cost of living growth as we continue to go forward.
There's a question about Perry Township impacting the growth of the district. We have very little interaction with Perry Township outside of some of their police protection and being part of our unified response plan. Right now, they're only showing 2 water line projects and a road closure project in Perry Township. So that's not one of the municipalities that we're seeing growth in. My impression is a lot of the Perry Township land is also part of the city of Columbus, which would have the city of Columbus being the municipality that would oversee some of those growth issues. Much like Washington Township, much of Washington Township, we think of Washington Township as fire and rescue. Much of the township has been incorporated by different municipalities that provide those other services. Brian, if the revenue is fixed and based on my market value, where are the additional tax dollars going when my values increase?
So I just kind of hit that again there. Again, we're talking about the inside millage and going there, and it's really going to the additional expenses that we have from enrollment growth. And, like I said, inflationary increases, cost of living increases as we go forward. I hope that answers kind of that person's questions. It's kind of piggybacking what I just said 2 questions ago.
Well, and Brian, we've had this conversation with some other folks when we've been able to have computers in front of us. I'd encourage people to go look at their historic Franklin County taxes if they live, well, in whatever county, because we've had people share with us that since 2018, when the last bond was passed, the last levy was passed, their taxes have actually gone down for the school portion of their taxes. And we've got to remember that since 2018, we've also passed an MRDD levy and a zoo levy and a senior citizens levy. And those other levies also show up on your tax bill. But I'd encourage every resident to go pull your last 5-6 years, dive into it, especially if it's in your escrow and you don't really see it every year. Go take a look, because for many of our residents, there's actually been an incremental decrease in what they pay to the schools, because as all these new residents have come into the pot, they've put more people in the pot that are paying, so your portion of that's gone down. So I'd encourage people to go look. Jen, enrollment projections were they wrong in the past? 2 to 3 years later, Eversol's got modulars. There are a couple things we could have done differently when we opened it. So do you want to just talk a little bit about where we are with debt?
Yes, it's always nice to look in the rearview mirror and wish you could change things. The previous administration did the best they could with the information that they had. As Dr. Marshausen said, no one knew that the projections for Jerome Village would go from 1,200 to almost 5,000 within just a few years. No one could have predicted how fast those homes would be built. And so DEP did open close to capacity. And so here we are. We have the modulars there to accommodate the students. Again, I think had it been opened with a different number of students, we'd still be here with a growth challenge in the Northwest quadrant. We would have students, we would have schools that were full in other areas. There isn't a single one of our schools that is empty. There's no extra space, so to speak. So in a lot of ways, we are really operating at maximum efficiency because most of our schools are at or near capacity. And then again, some are over. So again, I would love to go back 5 years and know what we know now, but we didn't. And all we can do is go forward with the projections and the information we have for the coming years.
Another question came in, will the administration be affected by cuts or just students and teachers? Everybody will be affected. I think when we looked at their other slide, we're looking at 11 building administrators. And when you think about the importance of what those interns and deans of students do, what the network administrator yesterday who left us to take a job in another state, what the loss of him means, it's going to be felt across the board, and it's going to be felt by our teachers and our parents as well. When you think about who attends meetings when there needs to be a district representative, eliminating those 11 people at the elementary and middle schools creates a burden for some of the special ed coordinators here, for principals, when we look at testing coordinators, when we look at the 27 folks here who are our coaches, and the burden that that's going to place for PD to be delivered at building levels and shifting how we operate. All of those things have a direct impact on how we all provide services to our kiddos. The average district in the country spends 4% on their admin. We spend 3%. When you look at average administrative costs per pupil, we're right in the middle with all of our neighboring districts. It's because of the expectations for the community we serve that we have a team that's able to get questions answered quickly, that's able to support our teachers and our community. When you think about the fact that we have made a monumental shift in how we teach reading, systemic shift in 2 years, less than 2 years now, and we've changed something that was generational in how we taught reading. It's like trying to steer an aircraft carrier. And when we talk about some of our other districts, Olentangy did it 10 years ago, made a shift in their approach to reading. UA did it 8 years ago, and they were able to ease in. We did it in 2 and trained all our teachers up and are seeing immediate results from the work that we're doing. So yeah, it's not just going to be felt by larger classes and fewer teachers. It's going to be felt across the board. And unfortunately, if the levy is rejected by our voters, there will be a change in services that the entire community sees from the school district. But when people are working at capacity and you have less people, then you have to change what the expectations are. And that's the option that we have as a community. Brian, you get to be the owner of the last question. Are there any proposals to make Jerome pay higher portion of the property taxes than other schools in the area?
Well, I get to start and I get to finish, and it's kind of going to have the same answer from that standpoint is no, there would not be any proposals like that. It gets back to the very first question of what do residents pay, or commercial and residential agricultural properties pay, and they pay the same tax rate throughout the district, no matter where you're at or where you live. Dr. Marshausen talked about impact fees. We're not allowed to assess those or any other type of things due to growth or whatever else. So to answer the question, no, everyone pays the same millage rate. Now your taxes are going to be different based off the value of your home, but the tax rate is the same in uniform where you're at in the district.
All right. Well, An hour and 40 minutes later, we hope that you are all better informed. I'd like to thank our team and Kelly and Cassie for your hard work getting this set up and the behind the scenes efforts. To my colleagues, Jen and Brian, thank you for joining me this evening. And to the 90 of you who were with us at one point or another this evening, thank you so much. If you have other questions or you want more information, info@dublinschools.net. We can get you information. We're still doing living room conversations, church meetings, youth groups. If there are folks that you think should benefit or could benefit in the next 4 weeks or so, we encourage you to reach out, as we're here because we know that learning isn't one day. Learning is a new opportunity every day, and we are so proud of what we get to do with the students each and every day in the Dublin City Schools. Thank you all very much and have a great evening.